Hello ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to show you a new type of node editor for the Unreal Engine. It's simply called Flowgraph. It's kind of toolset I've known for a decade, since the work on the Witcher series. In last years, Raycon Games gave me opportunity to implement such a thing in the Unreal Engine. I work on it with another programmer, Dariusz Murawski. Later on, I decided to write something similar from the scratch, re-implementing toolset as the open source plugin that would benefit many developers working on the Unreal Engine. Huge thanks to Raycon Games supporting me on this. It's designed to simplify scripting of the events in the game. Anything that you could describe as story or directed action. Quests, missions, objectives, non-real dialogues, spawning characters, changing the state of the world, also achievements, tutorials. It's meant to replace level blueprints in this kind of scripting. It's much better because it provides an elegant interface between systems and scripts using these systems. It simplifies daily work of the content designers, narrative and quest designers, this kind of level designers that script gameplay on the level. This form of scripting is easy to use by artists, QA, and even writers. Imagine that writers would be able to write a text and implement non-real dialogues directly in the Unreal editor. They would forget about using external tools like spreadsheets, RTC Draft, and wouldn't waste time on importing text to the engine. This editor is available as open source plugin on GitHub. The Flow plugin comes with its own runtime system called Flow subsystem, which allows you to create your own quest system, dialogue system, or any other event-based system. The Flow subsystem itself is design agnostic. It doesn't contain features from any specific game. You can adapt it to any kind of game, from small indie adventure, through real-time strategy, to massive open-world RPG. It's great for multiplayer games, since it reduces the number of custom blueprints in the project. The fundamental difference between Blueprint and Flowgraph is that FlowNode doesn't represent a function. A single FlowNode represents the Unreal object. This allows me to enclose control over an entire game feature in the single node. And every node has its own set of input pins and output pins. For instance, this play level sequence node has output called completed, activated when the playback of level sequence has reached the end. What's more, Flowgraph nodes are able to generate context pins, the special pins created out of the referenced asset. Context pins on the play level sequence node are created from keyframes placed on the flow event track on the sequence timeline. This kind of magic allows designers to call any kind of event during playback of cutscene or any other sequence animation. And your flow nodes can create context pins from any kind of asset. So when designers are working on connecting many events, they don't need to craft these huge networks of blueprint nodes anymore. They could exchange the blueprint spaghetti for the simple and elegant flow graph. It's super easy to read such graph, change the logic, and maintain it in the long term. It's so easy to work with even if you don't know first thing about programming or even simple scripting. And this is how this editor looks like. On the right we have the node palette, a list of nodes available in the given system. All nodes from the first 4 categories and the play level sequence node come from the Flow plugin itself. Most of these nodes simply control flow of the signal in graph. Like this execution sequence node does exactly the same job as the sequence node in Blueprints. A few remaining nodes, like trigger nodes, interaction node, come from the demo project added to the GitHub repository. These nodes are example how to write your own nodes for your project. It's all great, but some of you can be still wondering, why do we need another editor? Can we do this stuff with blueprints, blueprint macros? Blueprint scripting is already easy to learn and use for people who don't know anything about programming. Entire games can be created without programming, right? Well, that's common and quite harmful myth that Blueprint isn't programming. Blueprint is a visual scripting, and visual scripting is the simpler form of traditional programming. You place nodes on the graph and connect them in order to create set of instructions, similar to this C++ code. Don't get me wrong, Blueprint system is amazing, one of the best things in Unreal Engine 4. But if a given person worked every day with blueprints and didn't learn basic programming concepts, or how to organize code properly, we quickly end up with mess like this. After a few months of development, you discover that the entire game story is implemented this way. Flying spaghetti monster. Okay, let's list the major issues here. First of all, it's difficult to read this graph and understand what's happening. It's difficult for your teammates, but also for your future self. Come back here after a few weeks and you will have no idea what's going on. That's why it's so difficult to change anything here. Simply bug fix or design change. The next thing. Content designers tend to implement entire event logic in level blueprints. We end up in a situation where every single event in the game has unique code. It means unique test scenarios and unique bugs. It becomes very expensive and frustrating to maintain the game script. It's also very bad for multiplayer games, where you have to consider splitting every piece of game logic between server and client, and you have to replicate selected data to clients. The level blueprint is the simplest type of blueprint to use, still, it's too difficult for the least technical team members, like writers. And all of developers should be able to work with Unreal Editor. There's one last thing to consider. Epic is finally working on the open world streaming and world building workflows. In order to make open world streaming easy to work with, every actor instance in the map will be stored as a separate file on the disk. This is just my speculation at this point, but worlds managed in this way might not need sub-levels anymore. If there would be only a single level, it means there would be only a single level blueprint, and that would be insane to put the entire story of the world into a single level blueprint. So we need another way of scripting events. I know that a lot of people would say that we already have this another way. It's the common practice in Unreal Engine 4 to create blueprints of event actors, like a trigger blueprint with its own trigger box collision. Now, if you want to trigger any action of player entering the trigger, you would set up a set of custom actions directly in this actor blueprint. Now I'm exposing reference to the spawner actor instance, which would be another event actor placed on the same sublevel as the trigger blueprint, and calling it spawn method from the trigger blueprint. During the game development, we would add more and more such scripts to the trigger blueprint. Like for playing cutscene, we would expose reference to the level sequence asset, and we would start playback just after player entered the trigger. There are a few great things that we could say about this approach. First, obviously, it allows us to reuse the code, and that's something that we're never gonna have with level blueprints. Such event actors can be created and maintained by someone else than content designers, a programmer or gameplay designer, someone that knows a little more about programming features. However, there are a few problems hiding here. As with each level blueprints, we don't have any kind of graph allowing us to see the designed flow of events. Imagine that we need to check when the cutscene starts. Is it after entering the trigger or killing all the enemies? With this setup, you can check it easily. You would have to go through all the trigger actors and spawners actors in the scene to find where this cutscene actor is referenced. Another problem is that even gameplay designers often don't care about healthy programming practices. This trigger blueprint gonna end up referencing any other kind of event actor, feature, and system in the game, including a C++ function that was exposed to blueprint just to be used in one script, but designer didn't care and used it everywhere. For all these reasons, I would propose to abandon such way of scripting events. Why not to use Flowgraph instead of it? Flowgraph is designed to provide a clean system architecture, an elegant interface between system programmers and content designers. It's all thanks to its simplicity. A single gameplay feature is represented by the single flow node. Graphs based on such nodes are so easy to work with, it's so easy to understand what is the designed flow of events. Content designers are more focused on designing the events instead of organizing the blueprint spaghetti. System programmers are no longer required to expose so many systems to blueprints. Actually, it would be recommended to expose many features to designers only as flow nodes, to ensure that we don't use multiple scripting systems for the one job. And thanks to that, the code of gameplay mechanics wouldn't be mixed in blueprints in surprising ways. Combat system doesn't need to know anything about cutscenes or the quest system, trigger actor doesn't need to know anything about dialogue system or any other system in the game. And the last thing, teaching level blueprints entirely might improve your game performance, because engine wouldn't have to process this large network of nodes. It's one of the reasons why executing blueprints is slower than C++ code. Another reason is that content designers aren't best at following good programming practices. This screenshot comes from the excellent talk on blueprints prepared by the Epic Evangelist. I strongly recommend watching it to anybody doing anything in Blueprints. Flow nodes can be created in C++ and in Blueprints. If you have a programmer in the team, I would strongly recommend to create most of nodes or all of them in C++, so you can take advantage of the entire functionality of the Unreal Engine. For instance, C++ nodes can be integrated with the Visual Logger. It's a tool collecting a special type of detailed log events and visualizing them on the timeline. This is sometimes an extremely useful tool for debugging gameplay. Having a custom editor allowed me to add some unique debugging features. Active flow nodes can display debug information in the form of a pop-up above the node, instantly informing designers why the given node doesn't work. The graph editor highlights all the node connections that were ever active in this instance of the flow graph. It's that the easy way to inspect what actions have been activated in the past. Okay, I hope that I properly explained the basic concept of the flow graph, but there are still few things to talk about. First, I'd like to remind that the flow graph is available under open source license, so you are free to modify it, build your own tools, and distribute it to other people. I feel this is important to mention that many studios are already using this form of the event scripting. This is much older concept than Blueprints. One of the latest examples would be the game called Sinking City. Developers behind this game built a tool called Narration Editor. As you can see, it's based on the same concept as the flow graph. A long time before that, there was a Kismet in the Unreal Engine 3. Actually, a flow graph might look like a modern version of Kismet now when I'm looking at it. That would be even possible to add support for the simple variable types in the flow graph, which might be very useful in some games. Anyway, this video wouldn't be complete without presenting the last one toolset. You see, I'm the old guy, spent over the decade in the game dev, started as modder for the original Witcher game, hired as QA for The Witcher 2, and jumped to be a quest designer for The Witcher 3. One of the reasons why quests and dialogues in these games are that insanely good is because people working on it have a great quest editor and dialogue editor. This is how the quest editor for The Witcher 2 looks like. I can show it to you because The Witcher 2 editor was publicly available for some time, so the modders could create their own adventures. Most of the quest logic in The Witcher 2 is composed of those simple nodes, like the pause node waiting until player enters the trigger, nodes spawning characters, playing dialogues. Reading quest graph and debug it, it's so simple that QA guys could simply debug it and notify designers what's wrong with their quests. Another great thing about this system is that quest graph is not a part of the map, like Level Blueprint or Kismet. Quest graph is stored as a separate asset in the content, and it doesn't contain direct references to the actor instances placed on the map. So it's not like here that you can select an actor, go to Level Blueprint, and get the reference to it. It's super easy to script simple events this way, so it's awesome that we have this option in Unreal Engine, but it comes with few limitations. Level Blueprint can only get references to actor instances from the same sublevel. The same limitation applies to references between actors on different sublevels. You simply cannot have a hard reference to actor from different sublevel. That limits how designers can divide content in the world. Obviously, level blueprints and even actors cannot live longer than world, and this prevents us from doing few interesting things with events. We can have a single graph with stories stretching over many worlds, like many cities, regions, planets. We can't have an event graph living for entire multiplayer session instead of very specific map. We can't use level blueprint to script achievement, challenges and tutorials since many of them are independent from the world. A lot of this stuff has to be hard-coded in gameplay systems, which is often dirty and inefficient way of doing things. So, can we do it differently, overcome these limitations? Oh yes, we can, starting from Unreal Engine 4.15, which introduced gameplay tags. These tags are simple strings, but organized in hierarchy. Every dot in the name of the tag represents another level of hierarchy or another subcategory. It's a super smart feature. It allows you to easily categorize all the tags in the game, so later you can easily filter tags or find the specific object in the entire game just by knowing its gameplay tag. Once we created a gameplay tag, we can assign it to the gameplay tag variable or the special gameplay tag container. I use the latter one on the flow component, which is added to every actor that wants to interact with the flow graph. The base form of the flow component is extremely simple. There's only this single property called identity tags. On begin play, this component registers itself to the flow subsystem, which is globally accessible manager that lives as long as the entire game. The flow component registry in the flow subsystem allows to obtain reference to any flow component without iterating through all actors in the world. You only need to know the identity tag of the component you want to find. And this is how this trigger enter node is able to find trigger actor in the world. So you can place this trigger in any sublevel you want. This gives you a few new powers. You can operate on actors from multiple sublevels on even multiple worlds in the single flow graph. You can have a single graph with stories stretching over many worlds. You can have a graph living for entire multiplayer session. It doesn't matter which map players choose to play this time. You can use flow graph to script achievements, challenges, and tutorials that are independent from the world. And obviously, every flow graph is saved as a separate asset on the disk. This asset can be hooked up to the persistent level via the custom toolbar. And you can use subgraph node to instantiate another asset within this graph. Of course, you could execute many instances of the same event many times. What's more, you could have your custom ways of instantiating the flow graph without even connecting it to the map. For instance, you could start the personal quest for only one player in the multiplayer game. Let's proceed to the last big part of this presentation, dialogue systems. In my humble opinion, there's no single toolset for the Unreal Engine 4 that would allow for the efficient work on dialogues. At least, not something that is publicly available, so you could use it in your project. Now, I'd like to walk through common dialogue pipelines. Let's see why these pipelines aren't good enough, and how you could use FlowGraph to build efficient and convenient dialogue editor. The most primitive way of working on dialogue is to edit text in spreadsheet. I guess nobody loves it. It's inconvenient to write any text, impossible to manage non-real dialogues. Every dialogue must be exported to the engine before playing it and testing it, and that's why so many writers don't test a dialogue they're currently working on. A much better way is to use specialized tools like the RTC Draft. That's a really nice tool. It allows writers to assemble non-real dialogues themselves thanks to dedicated node editor. Still, dialogue has to be exported to the engine in format usable by the dialogue system. But imagine that you want to trigger some game event from your dialogue, like playing simple animation. It's impossible to do this easy way, because RTC Draft knows nothing about Unreal Engine. There's an entire blog post on the official Unreal Engine blog detailing how the integration with RTC Draft works. In my opinion, is full of hacks. It prevents writers, narrative designers, and programmers from utilizing the full power of Unreal Engine for storytelling. You can find the link to this blog post in the video description. Okay, let's see now what dialogue tools we have available in Unreal Engine. The simplest tool would be a data table editor. We can import data from spreadsheet to such data table, or edit this data directly in the editor. It's more or less convenient than editing spreadsheet, but if writers are using it, it means they have already editor up and running, so they could test dialogue in the game while they're working on this dialogue. What's more, data table can store references to any Unreal asset, like sound, icons, whatever else. Let's move to another option, using blueprint nodes as dialogue lines. Of course, the biggest change here is that we can use nodes to manage non-real dialogues. We can script any kind of condition, branching, and we can call any gameplay event. However, as I already explained, we don't want content designers to mess with blueprints, and they also would prefer to work with a dedicated dialogue editor. And there are a few marketplace plugins that come with such editor. As you can see in this example, we have a single node for a single dialogue line. We don't set properties of dialogue lines directly on the nodes like in blueprints. We set all properties via details panel, so the graph itself is clean, easy to read, and we can fit many nodes on the single screen. Such plugin usually includes a simple dialogue UI and a playback script. So if you need a dialogue system today, right now, you can try one of these plugins. However, graph editors from these plugins share one strange design choice, at least strange to me. They all mimic the behavior tree editor used for scripting AI in the Unreal Engine, and that imposes a few limitations, especially if you compare it with the flow graph. There's no pins on behavior tree nodes, so you cannot send various events to the graph during execution of the node. You cannot add pins that would handle custom mechanics. Let's say you have time-limited choice in dialogue and player didn't choose anything. You could have a special output on the flow node, like this timeout pin, that would allow writers to handle such situation any way they want. In my opinion, this is a much better way of handling complex dialogues. In these behavior tree inspired graphs, flow conditions are hidden in node properties or in the wire properties. And finally, in this behavior tree like setup, every dialog line is represented by the separate node. But why I listed this as limitation? Well, this is how a writer would love to write a text. This is a screenshot from the tool called Scrivener, a go-to app for writers of all kinds, used by novelists, screenwriters, lawyers, journalists. If they want to add a new dialog line, they simply hit enter. That's pretty insane, right? It allows to keep a writer in the flow of writing, instead of constantly managing nodes. Without a further ado, let's jump to the Witcher 3 dialog editor. This is how your game writers would love to work. Implementing the logic of the nodes and writing the entire text in the editor designed specifically to them. And I took this screenshot from the GTC talk. Piotr Tomsiński gave a great talk on cinematic dialogue system used by The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. I highly recommend watching it if you do anything related to dialogue systems. And if you like to build a similar tool, Flowgraph would be a great base for it. Adding such convenient writing panel is relatively simple. If you don't have a programmer in team to handle it, then I hope that some good person would create such flow-based dialog plugin and distribute it on GitHub or Marketplace. There is small chance that someday I would create my own sample quest system and dialog system, but I have no idea when this would happen. If you like to draw more inspirations from the toolset designed for the Witcher series, the Witcher 2 editor was publicly available for some time. It was called RedKit. You cannot download the editor anymore, but you can still find some designer manuals on the internet describing the gameplay and editor features. And I like to highlight one feature described there, very small but very useful feature. It's not included in my plugin, but I like to show you the concept. The fact database is a totally abstract way of storing information what players have done in the game. This database only stores pairs of simple variables. The gameplay tag would be a key and value would be an integer. The idea is that you would store this fact database in some globally accessible manager like the Flow subsystem, so you could read and modify this database from any place in the game. In this example, we add fact after player entered the trigger. It means the player visited some place at least one time. Let's say 4 hours later in the game, you check this fact in some dialogue, and if player visited this place, entire dialogue can go differently. Okay then, it's all I wanted to present today. Let's sum it up. The Flow plugin is ready to use event system with dedicated node editor. It's available as the open source project. You can use it to create your own systems and editors for any kind of game. It's designed to replace level blueprints and this method that I call referencing event actors. I hope to continue development of this plugin and anything that is related to the interactive storytelling in the Unreal Engine. If you like to get updates, you can watch GitHub repository, you can join Discord server dedicated to the Flow plugin, or simply follow me on the Twitter. Creating this Flow plugin and this presentation today was possible thanks to all projects I was working on the last decade. And again, special thanks go to Raycon Games for sharing my enthusiasm on making this plugin open source. In Raycon I have worked as technical designer / gameplay programmer, focusing on providing systems and tools to content designers. And thank you guys for watching this presentation.